What does this gas pump really depend on? A gap in the ocean, 34 kilometers wide, between two countries most Americans couldn't find on a map. And in the spring of 2026, it nearly broke the world economy. This is the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest, it is 34 kilometers across. The shipping lanes inside it are even narrower. Two channels, each just 3 kilometers wide, separated by a buffer that allows tankers to pass in opposite directions without colliding. On a normal day, roughly 100 ships pass through this gap. About a quarter of all the oil that moves by sea anywhere on Earth travels through it. So does about 1/5 of the world's liquefied natural gas. Roughly 15 million barrels of oil and refined products pass through the strait every single day. To put that in scale, that's more than the combined daily oil consumption of the European Union, China, and Japan. A single barrel of crude leaving a Saudi well bound for a Gulf Coast refinery will pass through 5 distinct choke points on its journey. Hormuz is the first one, and until February of 2026, it was the one nobody worried about. On the night of February 28th, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes against Iran. Among the targets killed in the first hours of the operation was Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Within 48 hours, Iran had effectively closed the strait. Not with a wall, with mines, with anti-ship missiles, with Revolutionary Guard fast boats, and with the simple and entirely credible threat that any tanker entering the strait might not leave it. In the month of February, before the strikes, approximately 3,000 vessels passed through Hormuz. In the month of April, after, the number was 191. A brief reopening was attempted on April 21st. It collapsed within 24 hours. The International Energy Agency called it the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the global market. Larger than the OPEC embargo of 1973, larger than the Iranian Revolution of 1979, larger than the First Gulf War. When most people picture an oil shock, they picture the gas pump. And gasoline prices did rise. But gasoline is only the most visible thing that depends on what comes out of Hormuz. The interesting parts of this story are everything else. Crude oil becomes diesel, and diesel moves almost everything. In the United States, roughly 70% of all freight by tonnage moves on a truck. The grocery store you visited this week was restocked by a diesel engine. The fertilizer that grew the food on its shelves was delivered by a diesel engine. The fuel that delivered the diesel was, itself, moved by diesel. Natural gas is the feedstock for ammonia. Ammonia is the feedstock for nitrogen fertilizer. Nitrogen fertilizer is the reason a hectare of modern farmland produces roughly 4 times what the same hectare produced a century ago. When the price of natural gas spiked in March, the global fertilizer price index rose more than 30% in 8 weeks. Crude is also the feedstock for naphtha. And naphtha is the feedstock for plastics. The casing on your refrigerator, the insulation on the wire behind your wall, the polyethylene bag your spinach came in, the lining of your car's interior, the housing of the laptop you might be watching this on, all of it traces back, somewhere in its supply chain, to a barrel of crude that came out of the ground in the Persian Gulf. And the liquefied natural gas that flows through Hormuz feeds the electrical grids of countries that, in the wake of the war in Ukraine, had already restructured their entire energy systems around the assumption that Gulf LNG would be available. When that assumption broke, several European industrial sectors, chemicals, steel, glass, shut down within weeks, not because they ran out of orders, because they ran out of electricity they could afford. A 34-kilometer gap in the ocean closed. This raises an obvious question. Why is so much of the world's energy routed through one strait, between two countries that have spent the last 40 years actively threatening each other? The short answer is geology. Roughly half of the world's proven conventional oil reserves sit in a band of porous limestone under the Persian Gulf. The cost to extract a barrel of that oil is, in some fields, less than $5. Nowhere else on Earth comes close. The longer answer is economics, history, and inertia. Refineries in Texas and Louisiana were built over decades to process the specific chemistry of Middle Eastern crude. Shipping routes were optimized around it. The U.S. Navy was, for the entire post-war period, the implicit guarantor that those routes would stay open. Every actor in the system, producers, consumers, traders, governments, made decisions that assumed the strait would remain navigable, because for 70 years it had. This is the part most people get wrong about modern infrastructure. Systems aren't fragile by accident. They are optimized into fragility. Every dollar saved by routing one more tanker through the cheapest path was a dollar that wasn't spent on the redundant pipeline, the alternative port, the strategic reserve, the second supplier. Efficiency and resilience are almost always in direct tension. For 70 years, the world chose efficiency. When the strait closed, the obvious question became, what are the alternatives? And the answer, in every case, turned out to be smaller than the problem. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve holds about 350 million barrels of crude. On paper, that's 75 days of the lost Hormuz flow. In practice, it can only be drawn down at a maximum rate of about 4 million barrels per day against 15 million barrels of disruption. It buys time. It does not replace supply. Saudi Arabia operates an east-west pipeline that crosses the Arabian Peninsula and bypasses Hormuz entirely, terminating at a port on the Red Sea. Its maximum throughput is about 5 million barrels per day. Most of that capacity was already in use. The marginal increase available in an emergency was closer to 2 million. American shale has changed the math for the United States. The country now produces more oil than any nation in history. It is, in normal times, a net exporter. But shale changed the math for the United States. It did not change the math for the world. Asian and European refineries still need Gulf crude. When Asian and European economies seize, American exports go to them, not to American gas tanks. New LNG export capacity takes 4 to 7 years to build. New pipelines take longer. The structural alternative to depending on Hormuz exists, but it exists on a timescale of decades. The disruption was measured in weeks. The system was built for efficiency, not redundancy. Resilience is expensive, and for 70 years, nobody paid for it. If you want to understand the invisible systems modern life depends on, subscribe. This is Base Layer. Next episode, why the electrical grid you depend on every day rests on a handful of machines almost no one on Earth can manufacture fast enough to replace.